Started introducing you.
Great.
I am very excited to welcome you, Leah, to join us tonight. Leah Koenig is the author of 6 cookbooks, including the Jewish Cookbook and Modern Jewish Cooking, which I also have, but I don't have it in front of me. She's currently working on her next book, exploring the Jewish cuisine of Rome. So I bet that'll be a tasty one. Yeah. Leah contributes to the New York Times, New York Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Food and Wine, Epicurious, Food 52, and Tablet, among other publications. She also has a weekly newsletter, The Jewish Table, which shares recipes and stories from the world of Jewish food. And fortunately for us, she also leads demonstrations. So it is our pleasure to welcome you tonight to join us and teach us. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Here, are you going to put me on speaker view? Okay. I just want to make sure, I always make sure I pin myself so I can see that, I can make sure you can see enough of what I'm doing. Because when it's really small,
I'll put you on speaker view as soon as Marguerite makes me the host.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Well, first I will just say thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's always a pleasure to cook with people in person or virtually for the last couple of years, and a little bit in person again. But I actually really like the virtual option, partially because we can bring people together from all sorts of different places, and also because my mom gets to come to almost all of them. So hello, Mom. and Carlotta, her friend, is also here joining us. So I am here in my very tiny kitchen in Brooklyn, and it is a pleasure to join you guys. So I know I'm the third of 3 events, and I've heard that the one with Joan and the one with Liz both went really well. I wish I could have come to them as well. They sounded great. And also I'm very well aware of the fact that we are like T-minus 40 some hours until the holiday. So if you're someone who cleans your kitchen for Passover, you're probably somewhere in the midst of doing that. Possibly you have your matzo ball soup already, made. So I just want to thank you for, the folks who came and who are joining us despite the fact that it's getting down to the wire. Hopefully what I'm going to show you tonight are dishes that you can incorporate either into your Seder, or if your Seder menu is already set. They're also good weeknight dishes, especially the meatballs. So, okay, so we're gonna make 2 different dishes tonight. The meatballs come from my most recent cookbook. This is the one that was held up earlier. It's called the Jewish Cookbook, and it came out in 2019. And it really is meant to sort of explore the world of Jewish cuisine. I'd like to say that aside from Antarctica, Jews have lived and cooked pretty much everywhere in the world, have lived, thrived, interacted with their neighbors. And so the food has evolved in a really incredible way. And as I'm sure many of you know, the dishes that are cooked if you're an Ashkenazi Jew are completely different than the dishes if you're from Morocco or from Azerbaijan or Calcutta or Mexico City or any of the places where Jews have lived throughout the centuries. But tonight we're actually going to I often do kind of global Jewish cuisine, and tonight we're going to kind of take it back home to my background, which is Ashkenazi, Russia, Lithuania, somewhere, Pale of Settlement, that kind of thing. And so we're going to be making potted meatballs, sweet and sour meatballs. And we're going to be making a somewhat riff on another cake that actually comes from my other cookbook, Modern Jewish Cooking. It's a pear and chocolate and almond cake that has no matzah meal, obviously no flour, totally gluten-free. So we're going to do that one first because I want to get it into the oven with the hopes of you being able to see it at the end. We'll see how that goes. Okay, it is super simple, and it starts with about 3/4 cup of roughly chopped almonds. I have chopped mine in advance. So we're basically going to make this cake in 3 parts. There's the kind of streusel-y nut streusel topping. there's the base, and then there's the pear layer, which it's basically just pears, but has a lot of delicious flavor going on. So I pre-chopped these almonds, and I did not want to go back to the store after having already done my Passover shopping when I realized I did not have enough almonds. So I'm actually subbing in some pecans, or pecans, or however you would like to say them. It's going to be totally delicious and fine. And it's also something I wanted to do because for me, it's so important that even when you're baking, like you can take creative liberties and switch up a nut, use a different type of sugar. It's always fun to play around. So we're going to see how half almonds and half pecans works in this case. To those almonds, I'm going to add 1/3 cup of brown sugar and 1.5 teaspoons of ground cinnamon. This is not my Kosher for Passover cinnamon because I haven't fully put my kitchen over yet, but I really love the package. It's just really beautiful, so I'll share it with you. Actually, on the topic of spices, I don't know if you guys have heard of this company called Burlap and Barrel. They're a spice company that works directly with farms all around the world to source really, really high quality single origin spices. I don't know if someone wants to drop Burlap and Barrel if their website into the chat, if that's possible, but their spices, not kosher for Passover, but really some of the best spices I've ever used. So I just like to plug them. It's run by 2 Jewish guys too, so you know, that's kind of fun. And then to the topping, the last thing I'm going to add is 2/3 cup of chocolate chips. And I'm pretty sure my 2/3 cup measure, or my 1/3 cup measure is dirty at the moment. This is like real home cooking, guys. So I am going to eyeball using my 1/4 cup measure and letting it overflow just a little bit. And honestly, I don't think adding a little extra chocolate to a recipe ever hurt anything. I think my mom once said, you measure it by your heart, or someone said that to me. You measure chocolate chips with your heart, not with your measuring cup. And I love that. So that's my philosophy too. So I have all these ingredients and I'm just gonna stir them together and set them aside. This is our topping. You don't have to add the chocolate if you don't want to, but I really, really like the combination of pear and chocolate. It's a traditional, you find it in France a lot. And it's actually really a really special combination. The juiciness of the pear and then like the chocolate, the richness of the chocolate. So we have this crumble that we're going to just set aside for now. For anyone who is cooking along at home, I should have mentioned to preheat your oven to 375 degrees. So if you haven't done that already, go ahead and do that. If you're not cooking, don't preheat your oven because there's no reason to. But it's 375. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is get the base of our cake going. And for that, I need 3 eggs, which I put right next to me because I'm more organized than I like to admit sometimes. And we're just going to crack those in. No need to separate the eggs. I know a lot of Passover dishes rely on separating your yolks from your whites. And in many cases, that is useful because it helps to build lift in the cake and to act as a rising agent. But this cake actually uses baking powder, which, a little known fact, is actually perfectly okay for Passover according to even Orthodox sources. Joe Nathan wrote an article about it, I think in 2006 or 7, that talks about how, especially when you're leavening something like nuts that are not chametz, it's totally okay to use baking powder. That was shocking to me. Some people even put baking soda in their matzo balls to help make them lighter in texture. That's also okay to do, even though it feels not right for Passover. Okay, so what we're going to do, it's going to get a little loud in here for a second. I have my stand mixer here. You can also use just a handheld electric mixer. And if your Passover kitchen doesn't have any sort of electric mixer, which I know a lot don't, you can use a whisk and just beat it for 5 minutes or so. You'll get a little arm workout, but it'll totally work. So while that's happening, I'm just gonna let it do its thing. And you wanna let them go for about a minute at this point, basically until the eggs start to get a little frothy, get a little bit lighter in color, because the eggs are going to help give lift to your cake and make it moist and kind of fluffy as opposed to really, really dense. So you want to give them time to do that. And then here, I'm going to speed it along just a little bit for the sake of the demo, but I would normally let that go for another 30 seconds or so. And to those eggs, I'm going to add 1/2 cup of regular granulated white sugar. And that adds sweetness to the cake. You can see there's only 1/3 cup of brown sugar in the topping and 1/2 cup in the cake itself. So it's actually, it's a sweet cake, but it's not like an overpoweringly saccharine sweet cake, which I really like. So it kind of works either as a dessert, but it also is nice as like a snacking cake, because, you know, we all need more snacks on Passover. But in general, I like to make my desserts sweet, but not too sweet. So I kind of split the difference there. Okay, so we're gonna let that go. And while that is happening, I have another bowl here. This is gonna be the rest of our base of our cake. So it's gonna be the dry ingredients. Let me turn that off. I'm gonna let that go for another minute in a minute. But what we're gonna add to here is 1.5 cups of almond flour. Almond flour, if you're not, obviously if you're nut free, it's an issue, but if you aren't, it's really one of my favorite baking mediums for Pesach. I love matzah meal for things like matzo balls, obviously, and you can coat schnitzel with matzah meal, and that's really nice. But for baking, I really actually like to stay away from matzah meal because to me, it has a noticeable flavor. Kind of, I don't know how you describe it. It's the flavor of matzo meal. And in some cakes, I feel like it shines through a little too much. So when I can avoid it, I like to avoid it. Although I will say there's a similar cake, not the same, but a similar cake in modern Jewish cooking that does use, I believe it uses some matzah meal. But in this cake, I actually developed it with the idea of like freeing yourself from the shackles of matzah meal in your baked goods, since we're all about freedom on Passover. Okay, so to that, I'm also going
Marguerite,
to add,
would you like to ask your question?
oh, sure.
Sure. So if you are nut free, my son has a tree nut allergy. Would you use cake meal, or what instead?
If you are allergic to nuts, I would not make this cake because, you know, that is the base, but
Yeah.
Let me find for you. I'm pretty sure the one in this book, Passover Pear Cake, page 287, is.
Well, you know, I have the book too, so I can,
Okay.
I can look it up.
This one is made with matzah meal and matzah cake meal, and not almond flour in the base. And there are pecans in the topping, but you could leave them out if that's an issue. So yeah.
I would just use extra chocolate because you could always have extra chocolate.
I mean, I wouldn't argue with you there. Okay, so we're also going to add 1/4 teaspoon, just eyeballing that, of salt, and then that 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. If you do use baking powder on Passover and you avoid kitniot and care about these things, you want to make sure you get a Kosher for Passover certified one, because there are other things in baking powder, like you know, different like cornstarch and things that are often in it. So this one uses a potato starch as its like binder ingredient. So you can find Kosher for Passover certified ones like Golden Bombs. I had never seen that till this year. Okay, so I think that's all we need for our dry ingredients. We are cooking along here. So I'm gonna just get this back up to speed, and we're almost ready to to build the cake. So I'm going to just use a fork. You could use a whisk to just kind of incorporate those things. Mostly wanting to get the baking powder incorporated so that it doesn't have like clumps of baking powder in the cake. Okay. So I am going to add, oh, I forgot to add one quick thing. I need to add 1/3 cup of oil and my vanilla extract, which I don't think I have. Let me double check. So I'm gonna do 1/3 cup of oil. This is a vegetable oil. I like to use safflower oil. It's a nice neutral flavored oil. Cottonseed kind of squicks me out because the cotton's not a food, so I don't know that I want to eat the oil of that food. So I tend to use like a light olive oil or a safflower. Use whatever you feel comfortable with and like. But
Would you use avocado oil for baking?
Yeah, avocado oil would be great. Grapeseed is another good Passover friendly neutral oil. There's options out there. And cottonseed, if that's something you enjoy, that's totally fine too. And one other thing I'm a little bit snobby about is vanilla. There is Kosher for Passover vanilla extract. And then there's also imitation vanilla. I do not like the flavor of the imitation vanilla. So I would either say splurge for the expensive real stuff or just leave it out and it's totally fine. You won't really notice it that much. It adds something, but if it's not there, it's not the end of the world. All right, I'm gonna get my oil mixed in. There's very few things that I'm snobby about with food, like canned beans, convenience foods, whatever. I love all of that. But I really like fresh lemon juice over the bottled lemon juice. I think the flavor is so noticeably different. And real vanilla over imitation vanilla. Those are, oh, and I don't use jarred garlic because I also find that it has lost so much of its vibrancy that fresh or the frozen are the ways to go, in my opinion. But that's literally as judgmental as I get on food. Everything else is fine. Okay, so I'm gonna add, normally I would add it in 2 rounds, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna just add it all at once. And hope for the best in terms of it all incorporating properly. I think it should be just fine. And we're just gonna let that go at low speed for about a minute. And while I'm doing that, I'm gonna show you my hack for lining my cake pan. So I have here a very well-loved springform pan. So this is a 9-inch round cake pan. What makes it a springform is that the bottom comes off, which makes taking cakes out a lot easier, and it just clips on like that. If you have a regular round 9-inch pan, that's totally fine. This is just for ease of getting it in and out. So when you're lining a round pan, it can be a little bit difficult to line it with parchment paper because obviously parchment paper comes out not in a nice circle. So you can either do it sort of the more fancy way, which is you would put this on a flat surface and take a pen and draw a circle and then cut that circle out. And that's how you line the bottom. But what I like to do is to take a piece that's a little bit larger and then like this. And that makes it nice and elastic and stretchy. So when you open it back up, see if I can show you this, it fits really well into the pan. I learned this on a photo shoot. And you do want to take a second to kind of get your sides not having a huge amount of crinkle, because otherwise your cake will have crinkly sides. I mean, if you're just serving this for like, you know, a snacking cake, that's totally fine. But, you know, if you're having company, you might want to just take an extra second to make it smooth. And that is literally like the best hack I have ever learned on from the real cooks, which for me are like the food stylists, because their job is to make recipes look perfect and beautiful. So I feel like they know more than anybody. Okay, so I am just realizing I need my spatula. I'm just going to get the batter off of here, and then we're going to build the cake and pop it in the oven and turn to the meatballs. Okay, so the last thing I have, which I've prepped in advance, are my pears. These are 3 Bosc pears that were ripe. Not overly ripe and mushy, but just kind of, firm, but with a little bit of give. And it's gonna seem like a lot of like pear for the amount of batter that you have, but the batter will kind of literally rise to the occasion. So don't have to worry about that. So we're gonna take half of our batter and kind of just put it in the bottom and spread it around. So we're going to build this cake like a lasagna in layers. And just kind of make sure it reaches all of the edges. I am not going to do this super neatly for the sake of time, but if I was making it for company, I would take a little bit longer. And then to the cake, I'm going to show you, I'll do the same thing. I'm going to add half of my pears. So you can see it really looks like a lot of pear, but what that does is the pears add so much moistness and flavor to the cake. So just gonna kind of eyeball approximately half of them. And then the dough really does, or the batter really does kind of rise up while you're baking it. And then I'm gonna take that nut mixture with the chocolate, all that almond and chocolate and cinnamon. It really like perfumes the house. It smells like Passover already. We're just gonna sprinkle half of that on top. It's like a coffee cake in that way. And then we're just gonna do, I might have gone a little heavy on that first layer, but that's okay. We're just gonna build that one more time. And if we aren't still together in time for me to show you what the finished cake looks like, I'll pull it out where it is in the oven so you can kind of see like the general idea. I'm sure you can already, you know what it's going to look like. It's going to look like a nice coffee cake type of a thing. And so I'm going to just gently spread the rest of the batter. It's okay if you don't fully cover everything. Spread that as well as I can. It's all going to get topped with another layer of pears, so you don't have to worry if you can still see some of the other stuff peeking through. And I'm gonna finish. Sorry, you can see my dirty dishes. That's okay. Gonna finish with a second layer of pears. And finally, after the second layer of pears, I'm going to put the rest of our chocolate and almond and sugar, brown sugar mix. I actually developed this recipe for Tablet Magazine. In 2020, they did this. They put out a Haggadah, and they did all this like they made these videos around so that they could like use them to help launch the Haggadah. And then of course COVID happened, so it was kind of a bummer because they had spent all this money and time to create like all of these videos, including this pear cake, and it kind of got lost in the shuffle, but it's still out there on YouTube, so you can see me making it again if you forget and need some refreshers on how to make it. Okay, so I have this beautiful cake that is going to go into the oven. I'm going to set my timer, and we can turn our attention to the meatballs. And I will just say the way I like to serve that cake is, either plain, because it actually has a lot of flavor all on its own, or with a dollop of whipped cream. If you're kosher and you're having a meat meal, you could use like a coconut whip, or you can serve it with a little bit of yogurt or coconut yogurt. There's lots of different ways you could serve it, but it's also just delicious on its own or dusted with a little powdered sugar. So however you want to do it works for me. Okay, so we're going to move over here. I'm realizing I'm a little tall. Okay, so.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Hi. That looks so delicious. Thank you. Do the pears stay chunky, or What's the texture of the pears?
Have you ever had an apple cake where like there's like a chunk of apple, but it's like a
Yeah.
soft? Yeah, it's very similar to that.
Okay.
Yeah, so they don't get mushy, they don't collapse, but they're tender, if that makes sense.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and they add so much moisture because, you know, they have moisture in them that comes out while they cook. So yeah. Okay, so these meatballs I make often, Passover or otherwise. When it's not Passover, I usually make them with breadcrumbs. And it's just super simple to swap out matzah meal on Passover itself. I have a similar recipe in modern Jewish cooking for pomegranate molasses meatballs, which is basically the same idea, but instead of using red wine vinegar, I use pomegranate molasses to sour them. But I don't think I've ever seen kosher for Passover pomegranate molasses. So flavor-wise, they're pretty similar. So, okay. So we're gonna start. I have here a Dutch oven. You can use any largish pot or saucepan. And we're just gonna put it over kind of medium heat and add 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil. You could use olive oil also if you prefer. I feel like our buddies in Eastern Europe had never heard of olive oil, so I just use vegetable oil to kind of match the flavor, but you can do either. And to that, I'm going to add 1 large onion that I have pre-chopped. Not terribly small. You can go smaller or a little bit larger. You don't want big chunks, but just a nice regular dice or chop is fine. And I'm going to let that kind of cook for a few minutes. This dish also comes together really nice and quick. And while my onions are coming up to the heat and cooking, I'm actually going to turn to the meatball mixture itself. I just realized I need an apron. I think all my aprons are dirty, but I'm definitely going to get sauce on this shirt. So, okay. So in this case, I'm actually going to make a half recipe. It's just going to be dinner for my family tomorrow night. So I'm making a full recipe of the sauce because extra sauce is always good, but I'm only going to use 1 pound of ground beef. But you can also use, normally you would use 2 pounds of ground beef, but you can also do 1 pound of beef and 1 pound of ground lamb if you like. If you like that flavor of lamb, it gives it a little something extra. I know that some of my vegetarian and vegan friends have substituted Beyond Meat, the ground crumbles, and they say it works just fine. So you can do that as well. I don't know if that's not really kosher for Passover, depending on how you hold, but in the rest of the year, you can totally do that. And we have our meat, and we're also going to add some onion flavor into the meat as well. So what I like to do is take a box grater like this and stick it in. Oh, that's the wrong size bowl. This will do. And just grate it. And the reason I like to grate it is because 2 reasons. One, it kind of dissolves into the meat mixture better than if I chop it. And also it releases a lot of the onion liquid, like the cells of the onion kind of burst. And so you get a lot of extra moisture from that onion water. So I take the large holes and take my onion and just kind of grate it. Normally I would do the whole thing, but since I am making a half recipe, I'll just grate about half. You could also do this on a food processor, but when you're just grating one, it's probably not worth having to clean your food processor after. So I just do it on a box grater. And I'll show you the texture of the onions. I certainly did not make up this technique. Probably a lot of you are like, yeah, I do this already. Nothing new under the sun, as they say. Okay, I'm going to stop at about the halfway mark here. And what you end up with I don't know how well you can see it, but you end up with very soft, kind of melting onion with a good amount of juice in it. So I'm gonna just put that all in there and let it help soften and tenderize my meat. Actually, when I was working on the Jewish cookbook, one thing I like to do when I'm developing recipes is whenever possible, I like to cook with somebody from the community where I'm getting a recipe from. So there's a big Syrian Jewish community in Brooklyn, not too far from me. And so I cooked with a woman and we didn't make meatballs. We made a different recipe with ground beef. It was stuffed zucchini. It's a dish called makshi, where you hollow out the center of a zucchini, not like a boat, but like literally like a hole, like you could look like a telescope through the zucchini. And then you make a meat mixture and stuff the meat mixture inside and then braise it in a sauce. It's very delicious. But one thing she told me was the way she gets her meat very tender is she actually adds up to like a 1/3 cup of warm water into the meat and she kneads it in with her hands. And I sort of was skeptical of this, but I was surprised at how much of that water, like the meat, it's kind of like when you're making mashed potatoes and you keep adding milk and you're like, wow, these are very absorbent. The meat was similarly able to absorb quite a bit of water. And what it did was you could feel the difference. Like the meat went from being kind of hard to being really kind of soft and tender and pliable. And then the makshi, the stuffed vegetables, it was just like, they were so succulent, melt in your mouth. So that's why I don't squeeze the water out of the onions also, because it adds flavor, but it also really helps to add that liquid to soften the meat. So little cooking tip from the Syrian community in Brooklyn. So we're gonna add 1 egg to this. Here, I'm just gonna, I know it's weird to kind of just see the lower half of my body, but I feel like it's more important for you to see what's going into the dish. So we have 1 egg, lightly beaten, which I will do in a sec. Grab a meat fork to do that. And then we need 1/2 cup of matzah meal or breadcrumbs. I'm just using regular, not cake meal, just regular matzah meal. And I'm gonna do it in like this. And this just serves as a binder to help keep the meatballs together. And then I need about a 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder. This is, just literally just garlic that has been dehydrated and ground up. So there's no salt. It's not garlic salt. There's no other flavoring in it. It's just kind of concentrated essence of garlic. I feel like some people have kind of scorned garlic powder and onion powder in recent years, but they're no different to me than using like dried thyme or dried oregano. It's just like the concentrated version of what you're making. And then I'm gonna add 1.5 teaspoons of kosher. Oh, LOL, no, I'm not. I'm only gonna add 3/4 of a cup because I'm making a half recipe. That's okay. I'm gonna have too many breadcrumbs also. Let me take a few out. That's hilarious. It's gonna be okay though. I've made this enough times that I know if I need to adjust it, I can. But normally you would add 1.5 cups of kosher salt. And I'm gonna add 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, but it's normally 1/2 cup. And then I took my wedding ring off because I like to mix this with my hands and then I don't have to clean my hands later. I'm sorry, my rings later. And I'm just gonna give it a squeeze. Want to make sure that you let your meat come to room temperature. Otherwise, if it's still a little bit frozen, I literally have like gotten frostbite on my hands trying to mix my meat mixture before. And we're going to set that aside for a second while we finish our sauce. I should ask, are there any questions that have come up?
I haven't seen any in the chat, but this is a great time for anybody to unmute and ask a question.
Feel free. It can be not about these recipes too. If you have questions about cookbook writing or global Jewish cuisine or
Well, I'll ask a question. I always ask this question, and it's about egg-free on Passover. My two daughters are allergic to eggs.
Oh, wow.
Right, super fun.
Yeah.
So any suggestions for particularly desserts getting around the eggs and egg substitutes?
Yeah. Do you eat kidney oat?
I eat kidney oat. My parents who spend the holiday with us do not, but yeah.
Well, I would say if you do eat kidney oat in your household, aquafaba is a really good solution, which is the liquid from a bean can, of chickpea can. People use that to make meringues and use it in baked goods, or flax or chia seeds. I actually think chia seeds might be kosher for Passover, even for people who don't keep kidney oat, but maybe not.
I think that's right. Yeah, I looked into that also.
So you can make, a chia egg and use that. But I know potatoes and eggs are like the two major food groups of Passover, so I feel for you. That's hard. There are a lot of great like fruit and chocolate desserts that you could make that are simple and don't have egg in them. But
yeah, I got a chocolate mold in the shape of frogs. So I have a feeling that's going to be like the big fancy dessert.
That sounds perfect to me. So I'm going to get the sauce going and then we can open it up for other questions. So I have, my onions are looking nice and golden. So I have here just some regular tomato sauce. This is not kosher for Passover because again, this is for tomorrow night, but and I'm using 2 cans because I called for 1 15-ounce can, but I have 2 8-ounce cans. So that's gonna be close enough. It's gonna work just fine. And I'm also going to add 1/2 cup. I'm gonna just kind of eyeball that. I've made this literally 1,000 times of water, which helps to give the sauce, kind of stretch the sauce a little further. I will show you what this looks like in a second, but I need to add just a couple more things. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of tomato paste. I recently started buying tomato paste in tubes instead of in the metal cylinders because you don't waste it. Like I never can go through an entire cylinder of tomato paste before it starts to go bad and get moldy. So these tubes you can, oh, sorry, someone's calling somebody. Okay. We have like multiple devices that are ringing at all times in this household. But this, you can just screw the top back on and put it in the fridge. And it lasts for, several weeks at least. So it gives you a little more time. And I put in about 1 tablespoon of that. And I'm also going to add another this is a 1/3 cup of brown sugar, which just Jewish cuisines across the world share a love of sweet and sour. So this is the sweet that would come along with either your pomegranate molasses or your vinegar. The real difference is what the souring agent is. Sugar is usually the sweetening agent, but if you're talking again about like the Syrian community, they use tamarind mostly for souring. If you're talking to Greek Jews, they usually use lemon juice or sometimes grape must was traditionally used in certain parts of Eastern Europe. You saw citric acid or sour salt was kind of a traditional way of souring something, which makes sense because there are not, in the winter, there weren't a ton of fresh lemons or fresh anything going on. So a shelf-stable sour salt, which you still see on things as citric acid, was what they used. So it really, the sweet and sour you find everywhere, and it's just kind of how it was done that changed and what the ingredient was. Pomegranate molasses was a big one. I'm trying to think of other souring agents, sometimes just tomato or tomato paste. Okay, I think I have everything but the salt and pepper in there. No, I don't have my red wine vinegar. So I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons approximately of red wine vinegar to this. 1, 2. Again, if I'm making this for company, I would measure it but I'm just making this at home, so I'm eyeballing it. But when I developed the recipes, I was very, very careful to test and measure and make sure that the amounts listed are going to lead you to success. So feel free to measure. And then I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of kosher salt. And I will taste this at the end to make sure my salt level is correct. And a 1/2 teaspoon approximately of ideally freshly ground, but regular pre-ground black pepper is just fine as well. And we're just going to stir that together and basically barely let it come up to a simmer, and then we're going to put our meatballs right in to cook. So that's perfect. Doesn't need a thing. And it's a touch not salty enough, but because the meatballs also have salt, they leach some of that salt into the sauce while they're cooking. So I'm not going to add any more right now. If at the end, it still doesn't, at the end of cooking, it still doesn't taste salty enough, that's when I would adjust. Okay, so I have my meat mixture. I'm just going to fold it in a little bit more. I turned my attention back to the sauce because my onions were browning too much. So I'm going to just get this going. And from here, I heard that last week, Liz Rubin made was it a Turkish meatball or some kind of Sephardic meatball? I'd be curious what was in those ones. That sounds really delicious.
Lots of leeks.
Ooh, nice. Oh, like keftas. I've made those. Those are very delish. We were joking before more folks came on that we would have like a meatball off. You can make both and serve them at your Seder and see which ones your guests liked better. I think for me, the answer would be both. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm taking, what do I say? I say rounded tablespoons, so I'm going to do a little bit less. And just going to roll these. Make I should show you the sauce really quick. So the sauce, I'm gonna use the magic of moving my computer to show you. It's just bubbling gently on the stove. It's not super, super fast. I'm actually gonna turn it down a little bit while I put the meatballs in so I don't scorch the bottom, and then turn it back up a little. And I'm just gonna start rolling and placing my meatballs right in. The mixture shouldn't stick, but if you're having trouble forming them, you can add a little water to your hands, or even a little oil, just a teeny tiny bit to help form them. But these are rolling pretty nicely. And
Leah, Marjorie has a question
Yeah.
that she'd like to ask while you're
Sure.
doing that.
Hi, I used to put my raw meatballs right into the sauce, and lately I've been giving them a quick bake in the oven before putting them in the sauce. And I was just curious about your opinion on that.
Yeah, I'm curious, have you noticed a major flavor difference?
No, I haven't. I don't know, something about putting the raw meat in just now. I don't know. I just seem to be, I'm happier baking them a little,
Yeah,
giving them a pre-bake.
I totally hear that. Putting raw meat into anything feels a little strange, but they do fully cook through before you eat them. And actually, one thing I like is the meat adds quite a bit of flavor to, especially if you're using lamb as an alternative, it adds quite a bit of flavor to the sauce. And for me, if I was going to bake the meatballs a little bit first, some of that liquid and moisture, flavor, and fat would leach out and make my sauce maybe a little bit less flavorful. However, the plus side would be you'd lose some of those, calories and saturated fat. So what I actually like to do is make the meatballs the day before and let them cool and put them in the fridge. And then so they give all the flavor, but then I skim off that layer of congealed orange fat that inevitably, forms on the top. And that's kind of how I make them a little healthier. I mean, I don't know if they're healthy, but a little bit healthier. But you should, if you want to bake them first, you totally should.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions while I'm rolling away? I will say that when you're making this with a full batch of meat, you're not going to be able to you're going to have to kind of layer the meatballs, and it's going to look again like there's not enough sauce. But because again, the meatballs release liquid, the sauce kind of rises as the meatballs are simmering. So you end up having a lot more sauce than you start with. So you don't have to worry if they're not all submerged right when you put them in. Okay.
Yeah, I've got another question for you.
Sure.
Just about what you serve with this meatball dish.
Yeah.
Is this like a potato kugel accompanying kind of
I
thing?
mean, yeah, absolutely. So when I make these meatballs, not on Passover, I like to serve them with egg noodles to soak up the sauce. They're obviously really good with challah also because the challah soaks up a lot of the sauce. But on Passover, I would either do a potato kugel, or you could do like a mashed potato or a roasted potato, some kind of starch. Quinoa would work too. I know a lot of people make quinoa now for Passover, and that would be, you know, for me, quinoa doesn't quite have the same excitement going on as other starches, but I use it a lot on Passover, and it definitely would work here as well. Yeah, my husband's his mother used to make them like cocktail sized, like smaller, and then she would serve them as an appetizer, like a Vorspeise, you know, before the main meal with like toothpicks. So you could also do that. I think that's a traditional way of serving them. Sometimes you see them at like Jewish weddings as like a past appetizer. To me, I like them as part of the main meal, but you could definitely do that as well. Just all of their own like little meatball lollipops.
Do you have a favorite quinoa side dish that you do?
You know, last night I actually did a demo in support of this woman named Erin Gleason. You might know her work. Sorry. Okay, my husband's on it. She has a website called The Forest Feast, where she used to live in New York. She was a photographer, and then she moved out to the west, kind of like the west coast in California, in Santa Cruz, I think, or outside of Santa Cruz. Lives in the forest, started like photographing food and the natural world around her, and is also a watercolor painter, so incorporated that into her food writing as well, and has made these beautiful books. I don't have mine close by, but it's called The Forest Feast. And so she demoed last night as part of this book event. She is Rabbi Prosnit's daughter-in-law. Yes, her husband is also Rabbi Prosnit, I think. That's right. Maybe some people are familiar with her. So she demoed this really beautiful quinoa salad where she used dried fruits like dates and dried peaches and cranberries, I think, to kind of make this beautiful flower shape on the top. So I kind of want to try that this year. But normally what I like to do is just cook my quinoa normally in like either water or broth. And then I like to saute a bunch of onions and either almonds or you could leave them out, and like golden raisins and maybe like a little bit of cinnamon and cumin, and then kind of mix that all together, and it really gives a nice flavor to the quinoa. So that's one thing I like to do. I also like to make quinoa tabbouleh. Obviously, it's not traditional tabbouleh with bulgur, but because bulgur is also very small, it kind of works really nicely, you know, chopped up with tomatoes and cucumbers and red onion and that kind of thing.
Thank you. That sounds great.
Yeah, totally. Oh, I wanted to tell you. So I just popped the lid onto here, and I'm going to let these simmer for approximately 30 minutes, 35 depending on your stovetop, and they are at medium low. That's right, because I don't want the sauce to burn. And just 1 or 2 times while they're cooking, I'll kind of take off the lid and either stir them or baste them with the sauce to make sure everything's kind of cooking evenly. And the way I like to test to make sure that they're done is I just take one out and cut it through in the half, and if it's cooked through, then I assume the rest of the batch is good to go. And that's really all there is to it. They're so simple. most of the work. If I wasn't yammering on, like I could have made them in 10 minutes and had them on the stove. So yeah, and let me see. I don't know if people want to stick around. I still have 12 minutes until the cake would come out, but I'd be happy to answer any questions, or yeah, or I could just show you what it looks like now if you kind of want to see it in process. You can tell me what you would prefer.
I definitely have more questions.
Ask away. I'm here.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I've really been enjoying your book,
Thank you.
and you cover, it's really encyclopedic with recipes from Jewish communities all over the world. And I'm wondering how much travel you did as part of this process, because I don't think there's a place you didn't visit.
I traveled a fair amount, but a lot of the travel happened prior to when I knew I was writing the book. Before COVID, when I'm doing demos in person, wherever I'm doing a demo, I try to reach out to somebody in the Jewish community there to cook with, because I kind of feel like if I'm traveling, if I'm leaving the kids, I'm getting on an airplane, I might as well like make the most out of the trip. And because so many of the places where the Jewish communities are from, the Jews no longer live there, right? Like if you go to Libya, there's no Jews left. If you go to India, there's very, very small communities where there used to be large ones. So I often find diaspora communities. Some favorite examples are, I did a cooking demo in Montreal, and there's a pretty big Moroccan community there. So I reached out to a friend that I knew in the Jewish community and was like, hey, like, do you know anyone I could cook with? And I ended up going over to this woman, Arlene's house, and she showed me how to make this stuffed, I guess there's a lot of stuffed vegetables in global Jewish cuisine, but we made these stuffed artichoke bottoms, which were like mind-blowingly delicious, pain in the butt to make, but so good. The recipe's in the book. You make like a meat mixture, you stuff it in the bottom of artichokes. She used frozen ones, which thank God, because I can't imagine starting from having to clean all of those artichokes for that. And then you egg and flour and fry the artichokes with the meat stuffed, and then you poach them in a sauce. So it's very labor intensive, but so delicious. And when I did a demo in Seattle, there's a big Sephardic community there. There's actually 2 Sephardic synagogues in Seattle, one that I think is from Turkey and one that's from Greece. So they both have baking groups where they get together semi-regularly to bake together and make, barekas and bulemas, which are like the spiral, they're similar to barekas, but they're spiral shaped, and bollos and bizcocho, like the little cookies. And so I got to cook with one of the women from that group. And so, I did a fair amount of travel, but some of it happened before, like it was for articles. And then when the book was happening, I like reached back out, and I didn't necessarily go back, but I was like, hey, have any other recipes? And then also like just living in New York, there's such a wealth of Jewish communities in the tri-state area. I cooked with a woman from Mumbai who taught me some, traditional dishes from Bene Israel. I cooked with a woman, Biji Barhani, who's from Ethiopia. Well, she grew up in Israel, but her family is from Ethiopia. So I learned Ethiopian Jewish dishes. So I consider myself a journalist first when it comes to this sort of thing. And, I'm not an expert on all Jewish cuisines, but I am curious and I ask questions, and I try to learn from the people who actually know things, and share their wisdom and their knowledge through my recipes and their stories too, and their stories.
Do you have a favorite cuisine?
Within Jewish cuisine?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working on this book about Rome's Jewish cuisine. So right now that's my favorite. It's if you've ever traveled to Rome and visited the Jewish ghetto neighborhood, you've probably eaten in restaurants. Maybe you've had, sorry, I don't know. We're very popular tonight. We're getting lots of phone calls. You've probably had their deep fried artichokes, which literally like the leaves taste like potato chips, and the inside, the heart is very like tender and silky. So delicious. and they just have really, really kind of very simple approach to cooking, very vegetable forward. The meat that they use is, the dishes are also very simple and just kind of more than the sum of their parts. Amazing baked goods. So yeah, that's probably the one that I'm most kind of fond of right now. But I love Jewish cuisine across the spectrum. The only thing, my Achilles heels as a Jewish food writer are herring. I can't do herring. It's too fishy for me. I have tried to cultivate a love of herring because I know I'm supposed to like it, but I just can't. And also for folks here, I don't know if anyone has had it, but pacha, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it's an old Ashkenazi dish where it's basically like meat jello, where you you cook the calf's foot, and you put a bunch of garlic in there, and you can serve it hot as like a soup for Friday night, and then the next day you serve it gelled and cold on Shabbat morning or for lunch. People who love it, but you know, if you love aspic, it's kind of like an aspic, but I just can't. I'm too new world for that. But yeah, I actually decided not to put a pacha recipe in the Jewish cookbook because I couldn't bring myself to develop it. But I do talk about it as a dish that exists. So yeah.
I would agree with you on that.
Yeah, it's maybe it'll make a comeback, you know, like maybe like tongue has made a comeback in some kind of hipster Jewish circles. But I kind of feel like a lot of those dishes were developed because Jewish communities lived in poverty and didn't have access to a lot of resources and were very resourceful in the way that they cooked. And, you know, I love that as a concept, but there are some dishes where I'm like, I don't need to make it anymore.
And what's the jar of green stuff that sits next to the borscht?
Oh, like at the supermarket. I was like, where? What? Borscht here? It's shav. So it's, if you've ever seen in the grocery store, the many bottles, there's, you know, usually like a jar of murky gefilte fish balls, and then there's a jar of borscht, and then there's a jar of something called shav, which is made out of sorrel. Sorrel is like a kind of lemony spinach. It's a green that was native to Eastern, not native, but grew in Eastern Europe. And so in the summer, they would make this soup out of it. And imagine if spinach had like a lemony flavor, that's what it was made out of. So it was kind of like a tart, lemony, spinachy kind of soup that you would garnish with hard-boiled egg and potato, kind of similar to a cold borscht. And you would serve it cold, and it's very delicious and refreshing. I have a recipe for shav. Oh, there's my daughter. They're getting to stay up a little late tonight. So it's actually quite delicious if it's made fresh, but I don't think I would use the stuff from the, yes, darling. Where's Papa? Good question. I don't know. Do you want to say hi to everybody? Say hi, this is Beatrice. Beatrice, how old are you? She's 3. She just turned 3.
Happy birthday. Hi, Beatrice.
She's learning all about Pesach and Passover at her school, and had a mock Seder yesterday, and is definitely ready for bed. Whoops. Are there any other questions?
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to know from this group, is anyone going to make any of the recipes that we learned from our 3 chefs? Marjorie, you are? Marguerite, you are?
I am.
I think-
I'm making Joe Nathan's flourless chocolate cake tomorrow. And I did have meatballs on my menu already. So I may take some of Leah's interesting tidbits and throw them into my meatballs. I'm also making a plant-based meatballs because I have vegans and vegetarians and nut allergies. So we run the full gamut.
Nice going, Marjorie.
So I'm going to go ahead, since we're coming to the end, and I don't literally know where my husband just went. We have a very small apartment. I don't know where he went. I don't know what he's doing. So I'm going to take out the cake so I can show it. What are you doing? You're so silly. We're winking. I'm gonna take out the cake. It's only like 3 minutes away, so it'll look like what it's supposed to look like. So Beatrice, I need you to be careful because I'm gonna open up the stove, okay? The oven. Okay? 1 second. Yeah, you go out there. Very smart. Thank you, kiddo. And it is looking like it needs another couple minutes, but it'll give you the idea. So you can see that it has puffed up nicely, and the top, it's a little wiggly in the center, so I'm going to put it back in for another 5 minutes. But when it cools, all of that juice from the pears just really like soaks into the cake. It's very moist and delicious, and the chocolate is such a nice addition. And I can't wait to eat this. This is going to be breakfast tomorrow because we already put all of our cereals away. So we're going to eat that instead. And it's almond flour, so it's healthy, right? It's got protein. Yeah, I guess, so the last thing I would say is, first of all, thank you so much for having me and welcoming me into your community just a couple of days before Passover. And if you want to follow along with my work, I'm going to just drop 2 things into the chat. So on Instagram, if you're on Instagram, you can follow me at leah.koenig. And then you have to go pee pee. Okay. I'm also going to put in my website for my newsletter. It's called The Jewish Table, and that is a place where I develop recipes and tell stories for, you know, the world of Jewish cuisine. Thanks, Yosh. For things that don't fit neatly into my cookbooks and my articles. It's a really vibrant community. There's a lot of great people who comment and stuff. So that's another, and there's both a paid and an unpaid subscription. So the major difference being you get more for the paid, you know, you get a weekly newsletter for the paid subscription and once a month for the free one, but you're welcome to join either. And yeah, I hope everybody has a happy and healthy Passover.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. And feel free to be in touch if you have any questions, or if you ever, I love when people send me recipe questions or tell me what they made. And so always feel free to be in touch.
Leah, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I think I'm going to, even though my son can't have that cake, he might be out of luck. I think I might be making that one this week.
I hope that you do and you enjoy it. And you can also, like I said, like make the one from Modern Jewish Cooking and just add chocolate to it, because that one is, it's also delicious. It's just, you know, I like the almond flour. So all right, thanks so much, everybody. I'm gonna go before my house explodes and implodes, but so lovely to be with you all, and Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach, thank you, and Chag Sameach to everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Bye, Leah.
Marguerite, kudos to you for this series. Thank you so much for organizing it. Chag
It's been my
Sameach,
pleasure.
everyone.
I've enjoyed it.